Shalom everyone, welcome back. So we're starting the book of Shemot, the second book of the Torah. And our Parsha Shemot, records how Moshe is born. He's born to the family of leadership. His father, Amram, is the leader of the Jewish people at the time. And his mother, Yocheved, is a very old lady, over 100 years old. And together they've already given birth to two great Jews, Aaron and Miriam. And when Amram is going to pass from the world, his son Aaron is going to be the leader of the Jewish people in Egypt. And when Amram hears that there's a new king in Egypt, he denies any recognition of Yosef. He says, I don't know this Yosef. And as he starts making the forced labor of the Jews, so the Jews are suffering, he's done it gently and softly, but before long, the Jews are really suffering. And when his stargazers tell him that a leader is going to be born to the Jews who will take them out of Egypt and really destroy all the Egyptian economy, so Pharaoh makes a decree that all male children that will be born will be thrown into the Nile. They believed the Nile was a god. So they could say, you have to worship the Nile, you have to serve your children up to the Nile. So when Amram hears this, he says, what are we doing? We're working our heads off here so that what? So that the children will ultimately be sacrificed? So Amram tells his wife Yocheved, let's you and I split, and this will be a way of showing the Jewish people that we all have to take a break. To bring children to this world who will later on be killed, that's pointless. And so Amram divorces his wife Yocheved, and his young daughter Miriam, who's all of 3 or 5 years old, she says, Dad, you're worse than Pharaoh. And Amram doesn't get upset at her. He asks her why. And she says, Pharaoh made a decree, but your decree is the decree of a tzaddik. If Pharaoh doesn't let the babies live in this world, you're not letting them even come to the world. You can't do this. And Amram hears his daughter's arguments one after another, and he says, you're right. And he remarries Yocheved in this great ceremony where Aaron and Miriam are dancing and celebrating their parents' marriage again. And then Yocheved gives birth to a baby that's unusual, the preemie Moshe Rabbeinu. They hide him until it's no longer possible. And then they put him in a casket in the Nile where his sister Miriam is watching what's going on. And there he is in the reeds of the Nile. And Pharaoh's own daughter has decided she doesn't believe the Nile is a god. So she goes into the Nile and uses it for bathing, which is the greatest declaration, this is not a god. And when she's there bathing, so she hears the baby crying, baby Moneus. She takes him out of the Nile, and her maids, they want to tell her, bad idea, don't do this. But Hashem has it that one by one they drop dead, so they can't say anything against it. And she reaches out her hand, and miraculously it extends and brings in baby Moshe. And when she takes him out of the casket, so baby Moshe urinates on her and cures her. She and Pharaoh, her father, they've been struggling with leprosy their whole lives. And when baby Moshe urinates on her, that's when she becomes cured. She says, what a fantastic baby. And she looks for a Jewish midwife who's going to be able to take care, someone who's going to be a wet nurse to take care of this baby. So Yocheved runs and summons her mother, and Miriam runs and summons her mother Yocheved. And Yocheved nurses her own baby Moshe, ostensibly as a wet nurse, and gets paid for doing it. Now, as Moshe is growing up in Pharaoh's palace, he recognizes his adopted mother teaches him, you're a Jew. And Moshe Rabbeinu recognizes that his brothers are suffering. So he wants to go out and see what's going on with them. And when he's 15 years old, he goes out and he sees 2 Jewish brothers, Dasan and Aviram, fighting. And he tries to stop them. And one of them says to him, who do you think you are? You're a kid. What do you think you're going to kill me just like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? You see, a day earlier, Dasan himself was being beaten by the Egyptian officer. And Moshe came on the scene and saw that the Egyptian was beating Dasan mercilessly and that Dasan would die. And all of this, why? Why was he beating the Jew? Because in the middle of the night, he had taken Dasan out to work and slipped back into his home and gone into bed with Dasan's wife. And when Dasan got wind of this, he came out and the Egyptians saw, hey, this guy is on to me. So instead he started beating him with the intent of killing him. And Moshe, a 15-year-old prince, shows up on the scene and kills the Egyptian and saves Dasan's life. But the very next day, when Dasan is battling his brother, he says to Moshe, who do you think you are? I'm going to give you over to Pharaoh. And Moshe looks at him and says, that's how you Jews are? You rat on one another? I saved your life yesterday, and now all I did was say, hey, you two brothers, stop fighting, and you're going to give me over to Pharaoh? Now, Moshe is taken into custody. He's put on death row. Pharaoh understands this is the worst thing that can happen if the Jews think they have a right to rebel, to fight the Egyptians who are beating them. And miraculously, Moshe makes it out. When he gets to Midian, there's another fugitive there, Yisro. And Yisro takes him. He wants him to marry his daughter. Yisro has himself left every form of idol worship to become a monotheist. And so he wants Moshe to marry his daughter. But when Moshe has his first son, Yisro says, look, if you circumcise him, then people here will kill me or kill you or kill the baby. You can't do that. You can't make such a declaration that we're all monotheists. Moshe is watching Yisro's sheep, and when he goes out into the desert, he sees a vision of a bush that's burning, a thorn bush, a sneh. And in that vision, he sees, hey, it's burning, but the bush remains vibrant. And this is a message of the Jewish people who are suffering in Egypt, yet they remain vibrant. And suddenly he hears his father's voice, and he looks around, where are you, Dad? And the voice says, I am the God of your father. I want you to go take the Jewish people out of Egypt. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, me? My brother Aaron's the leader. How am I going to go? No one's going to believe me. For 7 days, Hashem pleads with him to go, until finally Moshe says, I have a speech impediment. I can't do it. And Hashem says, I run the show. And your brother Aaron, don't worry. He's got such a kind heart. He's going to be happy you're coming. And then Moshe shows us what it means to be a trusted human being. He says to Hashem, okay, but first I have to get permission from my father-in-law. I promised I wouldn't leave without his permission. So even though he's going for the greatest job, he's going to be the first prophet that comes to mankind and says, I'm here. God has sent me with a message. He first has to live up to his responsibilities as a human being. He goes and gets his father-in-law's permission, goes back to Egypt, and our story begins as Moshe comes to Pharaoh's palace. He takes the elders who accept that Hashem has finally come to take them out of Egypt. He's been accepted by the leadership of the Jews. And when he comes to Pharaoh and says, God sent me, let my people go, Pharaoh says, I don't know God, and I'm not sending the Jews. And obviously they're not working hard enough because they're coming here with dreams of freedom, of going to serve their God. So we're just going to make the work worse. And he lets out a decree that the Jews are now going to have to gather their own hay to make the mortar. And the Jews who were being beaten to a pulp beforehand now find themselves suffering even more. And Moshe Rabbeinu returns to Hashem and says, why'd you send me? Obviously, I'm not the right man for the job. Look, things just got worse since I got here. And our Parsha ends with Hashem saying to him, don't worry. The story is just beginning. You're going to see how with a powerful hand I will force Paro's hand, and the Jews will be set free. Shabbat Shalom.